Hello, and thank you for joining us for the next episode of the Data Monetization webinar series. This episode will examine data monetization in retail and consumer markets. This is the fourth episode in a 6-part series, which will take place every other Thursday through mid-December. A recording of the webinar and the slides will be made available to all registrants. Feel free to enter any questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu. We invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to see news about other upcoming webinars. And with that, I'll turn things over to our moderators.
Hey, thank you, Michelle. And once again, thanks everyone for joining us again for another installment on our webinar series of monetization of data. And we're fortunate today to have another star panel of speakers go through the lineup here. Manjeet Rege is joining us again. And for those of you who haven't heard his introduction before, he's an associate professor and director at the Center for Applied Artificial Intelligence at the University of St. Thomas. Manjeet has a PhD in computer science and also has a podcast called All Things Data that I highly recommend if you get a chance to check into that. And Manjeet has a lot of experience in big data, and he's going to be one of our presenters today. Our next presenter today is also joining us again is Bill Schmarzo, and Bill is currently an executive fellow at the University of San Francisco. He's an honorary professor at the University at the Galway division of, is it the University of Northern Ireland, Bill? And NUI. And also Bill's an author of a number of different books, and he has got his own blog, and Bill's an excellent speaker. Looking forward to hearing what he has to say today. And our next speaker is Chris Hohman, who's currently the Vice President of Product Management at the Bank of the West. Chris has had a number of appointments through the years at various different leading high-tech companies, working, in the digital solutions and space. So Chris is going to bring to us a number of firsthand information about, the use of big data and monetization of data. We also have joining us again today is Suneel Arora, is a senior partner at the Schwegman Wissner firm. And I wouldn't put Lundberg in there because I'm Steve Lundberg, your moderator. And so Suneel has got about 25 years experience in high-tech patenting, and in particular has got a deep background in semiconductors and also med tech, and also does a lot of variety of other technologies. So with that, without further ado, we'll kind of launch into this a little bit. Today we're going to just kind of talk about how data is used in retail segment, and kind of different ways companies monetize their data in the retail sector, and goals that companies have in that domain. And so without further ado, let me pass it over to Professor Rege to kick us off today.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So our topic today is one of my favorite topics. We all have been touched by the data services, whether it's in retail or in the consumer industry. 90% of the data in the world was created in the last 2 years alone, right? You might have heard about that. In fact, more data has been created in the past 2 years than in the entire history of human race. Now, despite this, only 0.5% of data of that data is ever analyzed, let alone applied to use in enterprises or in businesses. 83% of the organizations in a recent study said that by using data wisely, they'll be able to make their products and services more profitable. Now, in that same study, that also found that only 60% of the companies in the US are actually using their data to generate true value. So we're going to explore some of the best ways that businesses can use data to learn more about their customers, get more customers, and more value for their products and services. And it all begins with the customer experience, right? So when we in the past webinars have talked about internal data monetization or external data monetization, all that does not matter if it does not serve your customer in an improved manner. And if you look at this particular quote from Steve Jobs and what Apple has been doing, if I can serve my customer better, if I can improve the experience a whole lot more, my customer ends up using the services more. And if the customer uses the services more, the customer ends up generating more data for the enterprise. And if I get more data, I can analyze that better and serve the customer back even better, right? So it's kind of a cycle there. So if you look at retail, um, there are certain strategic decisions that one has to make, and it all revolves around product placement in the entire store. Why are the mints and gums at the checkout? Why do you have to walk the entire store to get a gallon of milk? Um, and then if you analyze your data, then there might be other things that you might discover. At what time of the day might a particular product sell the most? Um, and then you might then have customized offerings at that particular store based on the ethnicity in that neighborhood. And in that particular neighborhood, are the customers looking for value for money products, or are they looking for premium products? And then based on that, you are going to serve your customer even better. So it all comes down to data. More data you collect about the customer, about the consumer, more improved services you can provide. So you might have access to descriptive data about the customers. If they are part of your frequent buyers club at your store, you have information, you have demographic information, you have information about where they live. They might have interacted with you in the past by sending an email, by um, you know, having maybe a phone call, or maybe these days, there is a recent trend of having chatbots online. So people might have communicated through the chatbot. All of that information is interaction data. And then, of course, you have the behavioral data where somebody walked into your store, walked out with a number of grocery items every 2 weeks. That's your transactional data. People might be coming to your online presence and then maybe purchasing something or browsing a lot of items. So that is your browsing history, um, and the amount of time they have spent on your online store as well. So all of that is behavioral data. So you have access to all of this information, all of this data, and all of this could be analyzed to increase consumer loyalty, improve your services, and get more people back into your store. And this could be done using a number of data science techniques. First one is what we call market basket analysis or association rule learning. And what we are trying to look at here is if you have transactional data where people have been coming to your store every 2 weeks or so and buying a number of items, can we look at what are the items that are frequently bought together, right? And that's why the name market basket. What are the items that are frequently put together into the shopping cart? And there have been many such studies that help us figure out that certain items, if they are often bought together, it makes sense from a product placement perspective in a retail store to place them close to each other, right? So help the consumer quickly pick up an item. And if you look at this Walmart study, they found out that if you kept bananas closer to where oatmeal is, at the same time, if you also kept bananas in the produce section, it helps people pick bananas as well as one of these items. Same thing with Kleenex, same thing with flashlights, if you look, are found in the hardware section as well as during the Halloween season. It is also kept in the Halloween costumes area. So it's all about analyzing your transactional data to figure out things that are often bought together. So this is market basket analysis. This is market segmentation. That is, if I have information about my customers and think about reaching my customers in terms of marketing, it would not make sense to have a one size fit all marketing strategy. Instead, what if I go and look at my customers? Remember, we have that large amounts of data that we have collected, and using that data, you split up the customers into different segments. That is what is called market segmentation. So, customers who belong to the same segment are considered to be similar to each other and dissimilar from people from the other segment. So, if you look at the picture on the right here, on average, all of my customers are spending $28 on average. But if I go and look at them in terms of these different subgroups, you find that there are some of them who are spending 150 on average and some who might be spending $8 on average. So now these are completely different customer groups. And now I can probably communicate a different marketing strategy to those VIPs and the different ones to the lower end of my spend for these customers. So this is customer segmentation. Now, if you think about where your product is getting sold, and especially in the brick and mortar stores, you could also be performing store segmentation. So, where is my consumer buying a product? Is the consumer buying the product at a small store down the street? Is the consumer buying a product at a larger grocery chain, a supermarket? Or is the consumer buying the product at a specialty store? Now, using these segments of stores, you could use that information for inventory management, for logistics. So, this tells you that if I have a segment of small stores, then all of those stores in that small store segment have a similar selling pattern. They have similar items that are being sold. And as a result, even in terms of marketing through those stores or serving those stores for a distribution channel, I need to be aware of segmenting my stores. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is building recommendation systems. And if you think about it, our lives have changed since the evolution of recommendation systems, right? Recommendation systems tell us which job on LinkedIn might be relevant to us. It tells us what movies to watch on Netflix. Well, they even tell us who to be friends with, right, on Facebook. So times have changed where you had to get in the car, drive a couple of miles, walk inside a store and go through every aisle and go and pick up a particular item. Now those same items are being served to you based on your profile, based on your behavioral information. And in fact, if you look at the information, if you look at the history of analytics, or specifically machine learning, recommendation systems has been the most revenue generating application of machine learning out there. And it is being shown here as well, where 35% of sales on Amazon come from recommendations that are being shown on your app. And the same thing is true for Netflix and Google. So it's all about personalization for a consumer based on how the consumer has shared the data with you. So speaking of recommendation systems, there are broadly two kinds of recommendation systems. First one is content based recommendation system. And while I'm going through this, think about how your own experience has been when you browse on sites like Amazon. So let's say I have 4 items, and I have a consumer who has expressed an interest in the first 2 items in the past. Now, you are a large e-commerce site, and you know that item 2 that you're selling is similar to item 4 that you're selling. So using that information, what can you do? Using that information, you can now recommend item 4 to the same consumer, because this particular consumer has, through the usage of the service, expressed an interest in the first 2 items, and you know that item 4 is similar to item 2. It makes sense to recommend other items that might be similar to what he has liked in the past. And same thing happens when you go and watch a movie on Netflix. Of course, to make it simple here, I've only mentioned the genres of the movie, but for every movie, you could be capturing a lot of information. You could be having the cast of the movie, uh, you have the genre, you have the length of the movie, the language of the movie, and then based on your previous browsing history, you could then come up with what possible score would you be giving to these other 3 movies on the right that you haven't seen in the past. So these 3 movies on the left you have seen, and then on Netflix, of course, you don't give an actual rating, but that this rating could also be calculated based on, whether you stopped the movie halfway, whether you watched the entire movie, right? And then based on that, a recommendation system can calculate what rating you might give to these other unseen movies. And then whichever one comes out on top will be the movie that might be recommended to you, right? So this is content based. Show new content based on the previously liked content. Now, on Amazon, you might have also experienced where Amazon says to you, people who bought this also bought this. Right? So that is collaborative filtering based recommendation system. So let's say here, what we are looking at is this person on the left has liked these 2 items, item 1 and 2, and this other person has liked item 1, item 2, and item 3. So what does that lead to? Well, there is some commonality in what they have liked. So these 2 users have 2 items in common. Now, the first person can now be recommended item 3 because the second person on the right has liked item 3. So because we see 2 items that are common to these 2, I can now recommend items to this first person that um, other people similar to him have liked, right? So this is, in a sense, what happens in a recommendation systems. can I group you based on your consumer data along with other people like you? And then the hope is similar people have similar preferences, and then based on that, share items with you. So, what we have seen is by applying the principles and practices of data science to your own business, um, and to your products and services, you can reach more people, solve more business problems, and generate more revenue. With that, I'll hand it over to my friend Chris Hohman.
Thanks, Manjeet. That was great. I really love the detail of that presentation. Kind of on a slightly different topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about a story around Nike and Amazon, a relationship they established back in 2017 for specific reasons. And this was widely publicized, a relationship that they built out. And then within a short period of time, with 2 years later, that relationship dissolved. And I think it's a great use case for understanding how a retail customer, especially within a digital world, would approach a decision to sell products in an omni-channel way through Amazon or through other means, and what types of decisions you might go through to make and take a good direction with your strategy, with your overall product strategy. And this plays very well into digital transformation, and where today you might want to take your small and medium-sized business online, and how you want to approach strategic relationships downstream. So why did they stop this relationship? What did they learn over those 2 years of working together? And so I wanted to take a look at their mission statements and just do a little comparative analysis about really, going back to what is the purpose for Nike? What is their motivation? What do they want to do? And same with Amazon. I mean, Nike, it really embodies the spirit of innovation, how they can bring innovation to, apparel, footwear, and even technology. I mean, they're thinking sort of big picture about the world of athletes and how to inspire people in that paradigm. Very different mission statement than, say, Amazon, which is, I think what's displayed here is their virtuous cycle, right? Amazon's all about accelerating and building out a means to find more product, having an awesome user experience around that purchasing cycle, and use that to build economies of scale, so they can have competitive prices, wide selection of product, and deliver upon that user experience in a very operational way. It's very, very much around operational efficiencies of delivering product to everyone in the world within the shortest period of time. And so if we dive a little deeper into the relationship that they established, Dan, if you want to move to the next slide. We can surmise, what was it that drove this relationship in the first place, and what were the drawbacks? And these are just things that I think anyone would want to consider if they're trying to follow the same trajectory that Nike did. I mean, the real reason they chose to go down this path was some control over how products were being sold on Amazon. I mean, even with a direct relationship or without one, there's going to be Nike products on Amazon, because Amazon's marketplace, right? So you have third-party players, and you have products that are actually owned by Amazon. And what's interesting about this is the lot of the third-party products, there's no control over, in some cases, what they are. And so there was a lot of evidence there was non-licensed products for Nike on Amazon that were being sold at a significant discount, and Nike wanted control over that. And so by forming this relationship, they thought they could have more structure and control over that green market, which they were given some behind the scenes control over, removing those products, flagging those products, removing those products from Amazon, which was a net positive, net benefit, right? They also already had a relationship with the fulfillment side of their products being sold through Amazon. So they already had some logistics net benefit from that relationship, and they still do. That didn't go away. But the downside to this was, moving product into Amazon, you give up control. It's lack of control. I mean, part of this comes down to how Amazon approaches merchandising. I think Manjeet just talked a lot about how you'd want to group and merchandise your product, and you can do that well within your own digital domain. But if you go outside your domain or into a store, then you're kind of at the mercy of that store owner of how they're going to do this. And that's very much the case with Amazon. Amazon, you're going to merchandise product. You're going to do product recommendations and all these other things. And the brand owner, especially at Nike, that really is dogmatic about the brand, doesn't have that control. And certainly around pricing, I think the graphic here talks a little bit about the dynamic pricing paradigm. This is something that really is critical to the success of Amazon, being able to compete on price while still manage, a positive economic outcome, both for Amazon as well as their products that they're selling on the site. Because of that, even though Nike may say, no, I'm not going to sell these new, this new sneaker design, I'm not going to sell this lower than a certain price. There's going to be others on the site that may have acquired, last season's shoe, and they're going to be displaying last season's shoe at a much lower price. And Nike really can't do anything about that. They're going to have to compete in that marketplace. And often what they found was their position within the overall products available for sale wasn't always coming out, as the number one recommended item within, they call this the buy box of the detail page for that product. And they often didn't win that. And yes, this is a new channel and an amazingly significantly large channel, but they weren't getting the net benefit they felt around their brand from this. And so that was the big driver for them to move away. Yes, they did, by severing this relationship, they did give up a good size of their channel, but I think Nike felt really that they needed to control that brand experience, and that was much more important to them than the revenue they were getting out of this specific channel, right? So it's that trade-off that any retailer would need to make when they're going down this path. In addition to the fact that you're sharing a lot of information about your customers with the channel you're selling into, in this case, Amazon. And there's good and bad that comes out of that. And so, what does this have to do with data? And I think, if you look at what Nike is trying to do with data, they've been spot on. And especially as we've gone from, sort of the pre-COVID timeframe through this transition to now COVID, it's more important than ever, right? Having the ability to go deep on that customer experience, to really understand who your customers are, what motivates them, not just in terms of product, but what motivates them around being an athlete, what motivates them about watching sports or being a part of, an athletic movement within this space. That's critical. It's critical for Nike because, it helps them not only from a logistics standpoint, but also from teeing up what is the next innovation they're going to focus on, and how are they going to use some of this information to drive that innovation within their ecosystem. And taking a step further, if you look at what they're doing from the digital paradigm around apps, they've moved from, they were early mover in this wearable space, and they moved now more directly into apps. Sneakers right here, that's called out as a personalization of athletic wear of shoes specifically. And that's amazing, right? Not only do they get to learn more about their customers, they also get to learn specifically what customers like or don't like through this customization of their shoes. I mean, that's an amazing amount of information that's being shared with Nike through this process that they can then turn around and be more innovative or find better ways to communicate with their audience, both as a sort of a marketing aspect, but also as personalization, right? Which is a big theme today in a lot of retail, is how do we get to that personalization paradigm? And of course, Nike's also getting much more involved in the media around that, like live streaming workouts, training, podcast. Something that's specific to COVID is Living Room Cup, and just inspiring people to be active, which benefits everybody, right? And so, Dan, next slide. So as we look at specifically what Nike is doing on the data side, I mean they built an entire division around data science, and it's probably one of the most actively recruited parts of Nike today. I mean they've broken this down into multiple aspects of their market, between the consumer market, so really focusing data science capabilities around their consumer, and on the commercial side. The consumer specifically, they're looking at opportunities to better amplify their brand. How do they generate and produce content that really resonates well with their audience? That personalization, right? This is, again, the holy grail. How do we build this direct relationship with their customers and get that data? In the previous slide, we shared some examples of that. And then of course, their direct analytics. Another thing that you kind of lose when you sell through a channel like Amazon is just really the site analytics. And so, if you're looking at recommended items or other consumers liked this type of product and combine the two, you're not going to get that kind of rich analytics if you're on a third-party site, but you will through a direct channel. And that's gold. It's gold for you to understand how your products are sold and what are like or similar products that would sell with them. On the commercial side, this is much more in I would say their commercial segment is much more focused on all the goodness that came out of Amazon, which is around sourcing and manufacturing, the supply chain management and operations. Of course, Nike is a multi-billion-dollar company, with over 1 billion SKUs, and so this is table stakes for them, and it would be table stakes for any like or similar sized organization. But I think the focus they're putting on the consumer is something that any size organization should be able to do. Next slide, please. So, and how is this benefiting for Nike? Moving away from Amazon as this channel, which, for a lot of small and medium-sized retailers is significant. I've worked at a smaller e-commerce retailer in Amazon. We did sell through Amazon. It was the largest and fastest growing channel for our business. At the time that I had left that organization, it was about 30% of their overall revenue. And so it's in many cases, it's a must have of your quiver, but you do give away so much in that process. So, if you need that revenue and you depend on it, it's a great place to sell product. But it comes at a cost. And for Nike, they were able to circumvent that. They still have this fantastic story around, and these are recent earnings, or the most recent earnings, where their digital sales are extremely, just prolific right now. Some of this has a tailwind because of COVID, but I think it's just that Nike is firing on all cylinders when it comes to their digital space and how they're moving quickly and moving customers quickly through this digital channel. Their targets, they're way ahead of targets in terms of digital sales versus their store sales, which is coming at a significantly higher than a lot of the retail players. And they do have, outside of their own Nike stores, they do have 4 or 5 select retailers that they work with. But even on top of that, it's the digital sales that's what's driving their growth right now. And then going back to the COVID, tailwinds that we just spoke of, I mean, this is real. So if you're a consumer today, or if you're in the retail space, COVID is here. Frankly, it's probably going to be permanent. A lot of these changes in user behavior, consumer behavior, are going to be permanent. And so without having a solid digital strategy in place for transformation, you know, it's, I hate to say this, but you might as well just start thinking about how you're going to downsize your organization, because without that digital strategy, without one that's tested, that works for your size of organization, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to compete today as well as tomorrow, as even post-COVID. And this is some information that shares that information. So what does this mean to you? You know, right now we're seeing the digital space accelerate probably 3x. In some you know, some other aspects of the consumer digital paradigm, it's probably 10x. The data that comes from this transformation is where you should really be doubling down in terms of building out your experiences, not only through your own properties, but even thinking more broadly, like if you're going to jump into another channel, how much control do you have over that channel? How important is your brand for you? How important is that lifetime value of that customer? Do you want to build that lifetime value, or do you want to be, you know, something that's a customer or retailer that's more focused on price, competing on at a price point that you think is beneficial to your customer? But if it's the brand, then you got to really think about your approach. And of course, you know, it goes without saying that you have to embrace technology, and all of this has got to be central to your overall experience. And I think with that, I will hand this over to Bill.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. And what I want to do, folks, is to build on all the excellent foundation and insights provided by both Manjeet and Chris. And I want to talk to you now about how do you create value during this age of digital transformation. And as you think about this, there are 4 really key aspects you need to contemplate. Click, please, Dan. First off, you need to go through a process to make sure you understand thoroughly the sources of value creation from your customers. There is a lot of design thinking tools, service design, journey maps, personas, and such. But the process here is very much wanting to make sure you understand where in the customer journey is value created and where along that customer journey is value impeded. And by the way, you should realize that your customer journey starts well before they ever touch your product or service, right? So you need to understand this. And this, by the way, is also a great place for deploying lots of innovation and creativity to better understand these sources of value creation and these sources of impediments of value creation. And for example, as we see organizations moving from a product-centric business to a capabilities as a service business, right? As X as a service, what we're seeing is that in order to really master X as a service, that, you know, when you build products, you engineer the capability into the product, and it becomes the user's responsibility to figure out how best to use that product. However, through digital transformation, as you're providing things as a service, think about what Uber and Lyft do, right? The design and engineer of the product now shifts responsibility. It's their responsibility to make sure that the customers know how to use the product. The responsibility for knowing how to use a product is shifting from the customer and the product's perspective to the designer and the engineers in a as a service perspective. In order to do that, you need to really understand these sources of value creation and the impediments to value. By the way, hint, these impediments, it's good, right? The impediments are also a great opportunity to monetize. You can monetize the impediments, but if you don't know what they are and you've not quantified them or identified them, you can't actually make money off of them. So once you've identified this source of the value creation, now you want to be able to codify these sources of value creation. You want to be able to turn these into math so that you can scale them, right? This is where data science kicks in. This is where machine learning and artificial intelligence and these things kick in, because once you've understand the source of the value, you want to be able to codify them. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about how to think about codifying. Next click, please. Once you can codify them, now you're ready to operationalize these sources of value creation, these insights, these codified insights throughout your value chain process. Everywhere from design to logistics to manufacturing to support, all the way through. Once you've codified the sources of value, now you're prepared to scale them and operationalize them. If you haven't codified them into math, it becomes human-centric to try to scale it. And that is not a good margin business. One more click here. You also need to make sure you're putting in place an environment that's continuously learning and adapting based on how customers are using your products and how your products are performing. You're going to need to master. You need to master understanding how customers are using your products in what situations and what scenarios, and also need to master understanding how your products are performing in those service situations, because that's going to impact your pricing, that's going to impact revenue, it's going to impact cost, it's going to impact our service level agreements, and bottom line, it's going to impact your viability as an organization. So if you as an organization want to make this digital transformation, right, you need to think about first identifying the sources of value creation using design thinking techniques. This is very much a very high touch customer process to make sure you intimately know where and how and why customers are trying to use your products. Number two, you need to be able to codify those using this data science into math. Three, you need to be able to operationalize this into your operational systems. But without number four, if you don't have an environment that's continuously learning and adapting, then you're doing this for naught, because your customer and your environments are going to change. As Chris talked about very succinctly, COVID changed everything. And the organizations that had in place this continuous learning and adapting environment were on top of all the changes that were taking place in their customers' behaviors and the product performance issues. Click next slide here, Dan. So when you start thinking about codifying your customers' sources of value creation, a technique that I've seen used and we use a lot is around this concept called analytic profiles. Some of you will know these as asset models. Some of you will know these as digital twins. But what it is what for every individual in the organization, every customer, maybe every salesperson, every nurse, every physician, right? We can build very detailed profiles on them. And I'm not talking about just a 360-degree view of the customer, which I think for most organizations is a total waste of time, but we can go over that later. What I want to do is I want to understand from the different data sources, both the traditional data sources like Manjeet talked about, as well as some non-traditional ones. I want to understand people's behaviors. I want to codify those behaviors. I want to know what their preferences are, what their tendencies are, what their relationships are. If I can understand those patterns, trends, relationships, propensities, and inclinations, I can monetize those. I can figure out what products they're likely to buy, when they're likely to buy them, through what channel. I can flag what customers are likely to leave, which customers I could probably increase, right? Having customer lifetime value is great, but I want to have a predicted customer lifetime value. I want to know how I can actually increase that by giving them the right kinds of offers and treatments and experience. So that the heart of driving the codification and operationalization of your customer insights and your product insights are based on these analytic profiles that allow you to build very detailed, reusable analytic assets that you can reuse over and over again. This becomes really important. I'm not building one-off machine learning models to solve a particular problem. I'm actively looking to build out my analytics in a composable, reusable manner so I can employ them across a number of different use cases. And every use case allows me to learn more and more about my customer and how they prefer to interact with me and the user experience. I'm learning more and more about my products and how they work and in what situations. And I'm also learning more about the operations of the business so I can optimize those as well. Next click, please. All this manifests itself into the data lake. Now, the data lake is the Rodney Dangerfield of our industry, right? It gets no respect. And the reason why is that people think that a data lake is simply a data repository. It's much more than that. The data lake becomes your data monetization platform that drives the governance to make certain that people are reusing the data and analytics across multiple use cases. If you can reuse the data and analytics across multiple use cases, you can not only drive down your costs and accelerate time to value, but more importantly, you can put in place a learning environment so that these data and analytics are continuously learning from every customer engagement across all these use cases. So you can stay on top of changes in the marketplace, product preferences and usage patterns and operational changes. So when the next COVID-19 comes out, there's a reason why it's called COVID-19, right? They didn't call it COVID, they call it COVID-19 because it happened in 2019. You know, very well could expect to see a COVID 2020, right? A COVID 24, right? So this allows us to put us into a situation where we can continuously learn about what's going on in the marketplace by tightly wiring and instrumenting our interactions with our customers and how customers are using our products. Next slide, please. The reason why this is important is that the economic aspects of data and analytics is unlike any other asset we've ever seen. Let's take data, for example. Data is an asset that never depletes, never wears out, and can be used across an unlimited number of use cases at zero marginal cost. I challenge you to find any other asset that you have in your organization that behaves like that. It's an asset that can be reused over and over again. But yet organizations allow things like data silos to exist, which totally inhibits the economic value of data. And as an example, look at the bottom here, how this theoretically works. Not theoretical, how it works in reality. Let's say you have a customer point of sales data system, right? And I'm going to use that POS data in sales to improve promotional effectiveness by some percent. And that 2.5%, for example, is worth, maybe it's $5 million, maybe it's $12 million, whatever the number is for your organization. I can use the point of sale data about my customers to improve promotional effectiveness. But wait a second, marketing can use that same exact data set at zero marginal cost to improve customer acquisition by some percentage, or the call center can use it to improve customer retention by some percentage, or the new product introduction group can use it to improve new product introductions, right? What you're seeing here is this idea that if you invest in data as an asset, and I don't mean just throwing raw data into some storage system somewhere. I mean taking and curating data and refining data and put it into the data lake so it's easily shareable, so it's easy to find, as everybody who's using it can take advantage of this marginal propensity to consume, which is almost equal to 1 when you got an asset that operates at zero marginal cost. So organizations in digital transformation are fundamentally changing how they view their data. It's not a cost we minimize. It's not something you gather as an afterthought. Digital transformation companies are using data at the core of codifying, operationalizing, and learning about their customer engagements. Next slide. And I'll wrap it up here with my attempt to win a Nobel Prize. I call this the Schmarzo Economic Digital Asset Valuation Theorem. And it's based on a simple premise that in knowledge-based industries, the economies of learning are more powerful than economies of scale. That is, the organizations that are going to win aren't necessarily the biggest organizations. They're the organizations that are most nimble to learn about what's going on in marketplaces, to learn about what's going on with their customers and their products, and can integrate that and codify that and operationalize it faster than their competition. So if you treat data as an asset you can use over and over again at zero marginal cost, and if you build your analytic assets, not as one-off ML orphaned analytics, but as reusable analytics you can reuse over and over again, there are 3 effects that happen. First off, on a use case by use case basis, of course, the bottom axis is use cases. On a use case by use case basis, your marginal costs flatten. What that means is that the data that you need to support most of your use cases have probably found their way into your data lake and curated. By the way, that doesn't mean all the data. What you're going to find is there are some data sets you have that offer no value. In fact, they may actually be liabilities, and you may want to question why you even capture that data. Click, please, here, Dan. Impact number 2 is by reusing the data and the analytics, and this requires you to build the analytics as reusable analytic modules. What happens is you can shrink time to value and de-risk projects as you go use case by use case. So you're starting to grow the economic value, and that little gap there starts to expand, right? Those 2, effect number 1 and 2 by itself, is reason enough to build a data lake of curated data and to have a data science analytic strategy around building reusable analytic assets. But it's effect number 3 that's a real game changer. And that is that if I build my analytic assets as reusable, continuous learning and adapting analytic assets, that any modifications and improvements that my big brain data scientist makes to one of my analytic modules. For example, let's say I have an analytic module that's around propensity to buy, right? And I use that propensity to buy in a number of different use cases. And then my big giant brain data science team figures out, using feature engineering or some new analytic technique or something, a new data source, they figure out how to make that propensity to buy model 1% more effective, 1% more effective. That improvement ripples back through every other use case that use that analytic module, and they all of a sudden, at zero marginal cost, become 1% more effective. Anyway, that's it. I think for my positioning for a Nobel Prize. If I do win it, I'll make sure that we all celebrated it. And Steve, I'll pass this back to you.
Hey, thanks, Bill. And I'm hoping that you can get your Nobel Prize someday. You definitely know what you're talking about. So I know, Suneel, you had a question that you had for the speakers, and so I'll pass it over to you to to ask that question if you would like.
Sure. Yeah. So I do have a question, but I think, another point has kind of occurred to me that I'd like to tee up before asking the question that we discussed earlier, Steve. And, just from listening to the speakers and listening to, Chris talking about the decision about going direct to consumer versus going through some kind of an omni-channel like Amazon, it seems to me like, I'm trying to understand that in the context of what Manjeet and Bill have been saying about trying to understand the user experience. And it just kind of seems to me as an Amazon buyer, and that being the, my limited exposure to this, that, Amazon would have a lot of information about who the customers are that are buying your products and, what their buying choices are. But that Amazon wouldn't have or be able to provide a lot of information about how your customers are actually using your products. And so I guess this is a question I'd like to tee up to all the speakers as to, whether that is a correct understanding and, how that might affect your direct to consumer versus omnichannel decision.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you made there, Sunil. So there is a trade-off, right? So when you go through when you go through a service like Amazon, you're able to reach a wide audience. They already have an established e-commerce platform, the Amazon fulfillment centers. So you're able to deliver your product very, very quickly. But all of that information about how the person is browsing, and based on that, building recommendation systems, that is not accessible to you as a manufacturer of a product. So I think that was a great point that Chris made about how Nike pivoted from that towards their own, where you are able to control the digital experience that your consumer is getting.
Could I add something to that? I think this is a really interesting point, and I think is that having insights into how customers are using your product is sort of the holy grail for any product company. B2B companies have an advantage, and through IoT and such, a lot of their products, whether they're trains or cars or whatever, are highly instrumented so that the manufacturer has detailed insights, or could, if they so determine, detailed insights into how customers are using their product and in what situations and et cetera. And having those insights impacts your product design, your pricing, everything else that happens. In the B2C space, it's harder. It's harder for a Procter & Gamble, for example, to instrument the boxes and of Tide and how much people are using when they wash. And people are trying to figure out how to do that through better services and such. But that is one of the advantages that we're starting to see in this digital transformation space. The Ubers of the world, they know a lot about how people are not only using their services, but they also know a lot about the drivers who are providing the services for these customers, their products per se. So I think this is a big challenge and a big opportunity for B2C companies. Is this instrumentation to understand the product usage behaviors and insights. And that's an area where I expect to see more and more X as a service offerings being put out there, because it does give the manufacturer a chance to really crystally understand how customers are using their products.
Yep. And this is Chris. So, and just to add to that, I think a lot of it comes down to it really probably depends on the product that you're referring to. If it's a consumable or a staple product, maybe it's more about the messaging around the product itself, or maybe there's some value back to the consumer that they want to amplify. Maybe it's a product that's made sustainably, or it's recycled materials are put into the product, right? That kind of value you want to amplify, you amplify it well. Sometimes that's hard to do within a shopping experience like Amazon, right? And so that might be one reason you would choose not to sell. If you're trying to really push sustainably created or made or recycled products or something that has to do with environment, you want to build that message. You want to probably build that message outside of a shopping, just a pure shopping experience like Amazon. You maybe still use that as a channel to drive consumers back to it, just to take the sort of the net benefit around the economies of scale that Amazon provides. But it's you gotta control that message. You gotta own that message. You have to understand whether it's resonating or not with your specific audience, and all of that's got to be done, you know, in detail. You can do that through research studies, focus groups, you know, all those sorts of things. But also there's whole other you know, specific channel information that we haven't really talked too much to today, which is the social aspect of it. How do you tap into that social side of things and use that to generate value around your messaging and your branding, and use that as a way to drive consumers back to your product? And from that, you can get a stronger sense of, like, you know, what's the intended use, what's that propensity to buy that Bill mentioned, things like that.
So I have a, actually, there's a question that just came in. Let me ask this. So what about consumers who are loyal to a specific brand, like an iPhone user? How much does this help data value?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So remember, one of the goals is also to improve your services. So if I know that I have a loyal customer, and if I'm able to learn more about how that loyal customer is using a product of mine, I can take cues from that and improve my product even more.
There was another comment that came in, which that was interesting, was concerning how important it is, you know, to make an experience like a shopping experience online fun for the consumer. And do they have ways to measure that, I guess, and how does that factor in?
Well, I think I would probably uh, steer back to our the main goal here is to monetize, right? So I think the question is talking about can we make e-commerce more fun? um, I think from a business or an enterprise perspective, the goal is probably to how do you engage the person, enhance the experience, learn more so that we can monetize better. So I would say, I think the question is more towards engagement, and yeah, that's a key point. If I can engage better with my consumer, I can get more data and then probably um, improve my services as a result of that.
Yeah.
So one
Just
other question I had, let me just throw this out there, unless somebody else wanted to comment on that. I didn't mean to interrupt there.
no problem. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to sort of just second that. And like, I think I even spoke to one aspect of what Nike was doing to make things more fun, which is like they came up with this living room cup, which is really just a challenge for folks to get more active within their living rooms, right? And that's something that they've promoted heavily. I think also if you want to, regardless of your product, there's so much to be sort of benefited by getting your product into the hands of folks that can be promoters of what it is your product does, and show, you know, using media, using YouTube, using other forms of media to show how others are enjoying the use of that product. That's really powerful stuff. And you want to promote that as much as you can to get that back into the consumers. And so that if they see other people, how they're enjoying or using the product or having a good time, it'll just tie back into a vision for them of how they would use it as well.
So if you're a startup or a smaller company and you'd like to get into this, or you realize this is strategic, you know, what are the baby steps that people need to take in order to kind of ramp up a program like this?
I think probably first and foremost, a data strategy, because the core of all of this is to have data that is collected with the goal of improving your services, monetizing it in some way or the other. Um, so if you have a data strategy that talks about how do you invest in the data, initially you might be offering free services so that you get more and more consumer behavioral information that you capture, and then eventually you end up monetizing that by improving your services or coming up with premium subscription models where you end up monetizing?
I've got a slightly different take on it. I would say if you're a startup, I think the most important thing you can do is really understand your customer journey. You need to understand how customers are going to engage with your product, how they're going to become aware of it, what happens when they do engage, and what happens after. Sort of the epiphany stage of what happens, followed by the afterglow sort of stages. If you don't have a good understanding of where the sources of value creation are and along your customer journey, then I won't know what data I should capture, right? I want to let the customer journey, and there's a lot of marvelous design thinking tools out there. I mentioned service design tools are great and customer journey maps are great, but they allow me to understand based on what's of high value to the customer, what data should I be capturing in order to help codify that, and what analytics do I need to be able to build as part of that. So to me, it starts with really understanding in detail your customers' sources of value creation and the impediments to that value creation.
Well, if there aren't any other comments on that, I just want to take a moment to thank our speakers again. You guys did, as always, a really terrific job, and really appreciate you joining the panel today. And then without further ado, I'll hand it off to Michelle, who will, I guess, make some post-program notes for everybody.
Steve, so the next episode in our series will take place on Thursday, December 3rd, and it will discuss data monetization in autonomous vehicles, security, and surveillance. So if you have colleagues who'd be interested, please do let them know. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and be safe.
Thank you all. Cheers.